March is Women's History Month, and the National Women's History Alliance selected the theme, Celebrating Women Who Tell Our Stories. My name is Brittany Baker. Thank you for tuning in to the Get Schooled on Public Education podcast. I would like to introduce our special guest. She runs the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, a nonprofit committed to increasing student access to high-quality public schools. It is my honor to welcome our president and CEO, Nina Rees. Hi, Nina.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to chat with you today. For more than 10 years, you have stood along with families and many individuals in the education space to help elevate their stories, as well as to expand, strengthen, and preserve top-tier public education options for all children. And during this chat, I want to share some inspirational quotes from inspirational women in honor of Women's History Month. So I'll start with the late U.S. Supreme Court Justice and longtime advocate for gender equality, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She once said, "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." Nina, your career path has been extremely impressive. Tell us about your various roles and how you've helped create opportunities for other women while being a trailblazer.
Well, again, thank you so much, Brittany, for your leadership in our organization and setting up this podcast. And it's my honor to be on your second installment of this podcast. So I've been at this about 30 years. Believe it or not, I started my career in Washington, D.C. in 1991 as a staffer on Capitol Hill. And one thing led to another. Eventually, I found myself at a public interest law firm that litigated on behalf of clients who were fighting for economic liberty, property rights, and school choice. Something about the stories of the families we were litigating on behalf of that really resonated with me. And in reflecting back, I think it had a lot to do with my own upbringing. I'm an immigrant. I was born and raised in Iran, left Iran in 1983 after the Iranian Revolution, which is something that's in the news these days. The morality police actually arrested me, and I was in jail for 2 nights without my parents knowing where I was. And so that experience prompted my family to pick up and leave Iran. My father was educated in the U.S., so he had friends who were able to get him a job eventually at a university. So we moved all the way from Iran to a small town called Blacksburg, Virginia, which only had one public high school, and that's where I went to school. I don't even know how I did academically in that setting. English was my third language. The concept of teaching kids for whom English was not a first language was not common to them. So, but I had parents who cared, obviously, and pulled everything together in order to give me the resources I needed to eventually go to college and graduate. But fast forward to my experience at this public interest law firm, I'm listening to the stories of these families who often are across the street from a public school they want to send their kids to, but can't because the school that the kid is assigned to is miles away. Or they are in a setting that simply doesn't have a high quality option or an option that fits their kids' needs. So to me, in this country in particular, the road to the American dream starts with a good education. There are a lot of other things that need to come in place and be pulled together as well. But if you don't get a good education, your odds of getting to these other things are vastly reduced. And getting the education piece right will have an impact on everything else. It has an impact on whether you go to college, whether you get a good job, whether you stay out of trouble. So that's when I started to really dedicate my personal career to this cause. And everything I've done ever since hasn't really felt like a job. It's felt like just something that I'm enjoying to do and that I'm grateful and privileged to be in because most of the jobs I see out there are usually a job in order to raise money and do something different. For me, my day and nights are the same because I really believe in this movement. And I think charter schools, which is what I've been doing for the past 10 years, are the best way to open access to public education. The vast majority of our kids are in public schools, and the vast majority of Americans want a solid public school in their districts. Charter schools make it possible for individuals to open new public schools in your neighborhood. And that's why I'm bullish about it. And that's why I love what I do. And I've also just seen, again, fast forward, all the stories that you're now covering. There's so many of them. I mean, it's hard to listen to these stories and question the importance of what we do.
Absolutely. And you touched on it a little bit before, but what were your early years of education like, and how has that shaped your current views?
So as I said, I grew up in another country. I went
Right.
to a private school. It was a French school, a French immersion program, and it was a very lovely setting. As my parents like to talk about the past, this was not a school you could get admitted to. You had to have connections, and it was very hard to get into. I don't know what sorts of strings they pulled, but they were very proud of the fact that I got into this school. After the revolution, that one of the first things that the government did was to close this school because they didn't want to have Western influence in the country. So I ended up attending a regular school in my neighborhood, a public school. But interestingly enough, this was a public school that taught religion, because religion is such a big part of life and government in Iran. So, in this school, I was learning everything back in Farsi, but I also had to take courses in Islam. I had to also take courses in Arabic. I mean, these were not things that I necessarily remember much of, but to be forced into learning a religion is different from opting into it, of course. So interestingly enough, I thought the quality of the teaching staff was pretty good. I also, for the first time, was in a classroom with students whose parents were cab drivers and people who were from very different socioeconomic backgrounds than the school I was attending. So in that respect, I kind of enjoyed this new setting, even though it was very strange and I had to be fully covered, even though it was a single-sex school. They segregated students. So that was the early years. And as I said, when we moved to the U.S., Blacksburg High School, a small rural school in Southwest Virginia, I think I was maybe one of 2 or 3 immigrants in that school. And this remains one of the best high schools in Virginia, and I think it's also a typical school in a lot of these rural communities that's meeting the needs of the community. For the average student attending it, it's doing a decent job. But when you throw in an anomaly or you throw in someone who's a little bit different, it is probably not going to be a good fit. And so the other thing that I like about what we do are the options and doors that choice opens. Whether you will ever have a charter school in that community is a question mark, because the population is not that high. But if you had options such as online learning, those are definitely things that would have potentially been a better fit for me than attending a brick and mortar school, in a small town post the Iranian Revolution, post the hostage crisis.
Education is a field that's often dominated by women. Who are some of the women educators who most inspire you?
That's a great question. I'll just start by saying the woman who kind of has been my role model all my life is my mom. My mom she worked for Iran Airlines in their legal offices. She woke up every day very early to catch a bus to go to work and come home. So growing up in a household where my mom worked full-time along with my father was just something that I thought people did. So when I moved here and I noticed these other methods of staying at home, it just didn't resonate with me. I grew up with a lot of very strong women. Her mom was a very strong woman, her sister. So when I think of role models, I really think of them as individuals who stood their ground and, they spoke their mind, basically. And I appreciated growing up in a setting where women had strong voices. In terms of educators here in the U.S., to me, teaching is probably one of the most rewarding and one of the most important jobs in this country. Because at the end of the day, next to your parents, the person who's going to have the greatest influence on a child's life is that teacher. And we have so many stories in our schools, in public schools, private schools, of teachers, one teacher who made a change in a child's life. And so I don't think I have one example, but a lot of examples of teachers who have done great work. And so one of the things I love the most, this is an event that the White House holds every year, honoring the best teacher of the year through the Council of Chief State School Officers. I think anything we can do in this country to elevate the stature of teachers in the professionals that they are will be hugely valuable, because they are often seen as someone who's just doing this job and doesn't get paid enough, when in fact what they end up doing in the days that they're with your kid stands to shape their character and also their education trajectory more than anything else.
Absolutely. 3.7 million students are enrolled in charter schools, and the number continues to climb. What factors do you believe contribute to the growing demand of charter schools?
Well, people, all things being equal, want more options rather than fewer options. We saw in the pandemic 240,000 students enrolled in charter schools. And now think about it. We only have 7,700 charter schools. We're only 7% of the total market share of students in schools in this country. So the fact that so many of them opted to go in a charter school in the community that had them indicates there would have been more if we had more of them. So the pandemic demonstrated parents want more, not less options. Before that, we've done some surveys that demonstrate, again, do you want more options in your community? Of course, everyone is going to say yes. The more they know about charter schools and what charter schools can do, the more they want them, even if they themselves are happy with the public or private school that they're sending their kids to. So this is one of those things that's in the water, and people want to have more options, and our schools are doing a good job at three things. First of all, they're schools of choice, so no one's forced to attend them. Second, they place a premium on your unique needs. So if you want a STEM-centric education, there's a charter school for that. If you want something that's more back to basics, reading instruction, math instruction, kind of more of a traditional setting, you have those options. If there are a lot of schools here in DC that are focused on kids who have dropped out of high school. So that customization is definitely one of the key ingredients that makes charter schools attractive. They tend to be smaller, and most of all, as I said earlier, they tend to attract teachers who want to do things differently. So in that sense, the sense of agency that teachers have in those schools definitely helps make them a more attractive medium for both the families and the administration of the school.
And I experienced that firsthand when I was teaching kindergarten in a charter school. I was just so impressed with all of the opportunities, how much we were just encouraged to customize the lesson toward each child's needs. Like it was such a beautiful experience. So it's just everything that you're saying. It's like it's taking me back to those days when I was teaching in a charter school, and it's. I love charter schools.
Well, I should be asking you some questions right? about that school, Brittany.
Yes. Okay. So philanthropist Melinda Gates once said, "Connect deeply with others. Our humanity is the one thing that we will have in common." Over the years, I've watched you build meaningful relationships in the charter school sector, all while staying true to our core focus, which is putting children first. What's one of the most memorable stories someone has shared with you about their experience with charter schools?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. I would start with the founders of some of the schools that I'm most familiar with. And I think the early stages of opening a school and breaking away from what you used to know to be true and safe into starting a new school is always exciting. So I don't know that I'm going to answer your question directly, but one of the women that I got to know in the mid-90s was Iracema Salcido, who ended up starting a school in D.C. called the Cesar Chavez Public Charter School. Yeah. And this woman was pregnant with her fifth child. She had a very good job in the D.C. public school system. But when she saw that charter application, it was like a calling. I want to start my own high school. And, anyone who's lived in D.C. knows we don't have a lot of high schools in D.C. There are a couple that do a really good job, and then the rest of them, unfortunately, are not doing a terribly good job, which means most families end up either leaving DC or sending their kids to private schools. So she decided to put that application together eventually got the charter, and her schools are now standing. She has had her struggles, but what was great about her story is that, again, she left a very stable setting at a time where most people, after their fifth kid, they wouldn't want to try something that's this revolutionary. But these are the types of individuals that we need in our space, people who are tired of doing the same thing over and over and have a vision for doing it better. For a while in the 90s, when charters were popular and coming on the scene, there were a lot of them out there. Those who founded KIPP are an example. Aspire Charter Schools in California, the leadership of that school, Don Shalvey and others, is a good example. So my experience with these leaders is what got me to really pay attention to charter schools. They were Democrats and Republicans, civil rights activists, and people who just wanted to run a good school. But they came together with families who were not getting a good education, and often were drawn to private education or private school choice programs. By creating the chartering medium, we were able to keep them all in the public space while creating schools that arguably, in my opinion, were much better than the private schools that they were about to opt into.
In former First Lady Michelle Obama's most recent memoir, The Light We Carry, she said, "When we allow ourselves to celebrate tiny victories, as important and meaningful, we start to understand the incremental nature of change, how one vote can help change our democracy, how raising a child who is whole and loved can help change a nation, how educating one girl can change a whole village for the better." We want to take some time to celebrate some of our victories for charter school students, including a major one, protecting the charter schools program. Last year, in 2022, the U.S. Department of Education proposed harmful rules to the program that would have made it harder for charter schools to grow. And under your leadership, the National Alliance helped parents tell their stories about their charter school experience in front of the White House. And as a result, the U.S. Department of Education removed some of the harmful suggestions. How did that victory make you feel? And what are some of the other major wins we've celebrated as a charter school sector?
Well, Brittany, you can't quote Michelle Obama and not open the door to having a discussion around her leadership. I read her book, Becoming. I haven't read this recent book. And everything she says in Becoming and some of the things I've heard here are like gospel. So you can like turn the book into a set of quotes and like remind yourself of her and her, who she is, how she grew up, what she became. All of that is just so interesting, and also kind of a testament of what I was saying earlier about the American dream and the opportunities you have if you're afforded a good education. And we hope that she will come to our National Charter Schools Conference one day, because our audience, like all audiences, would love to see her and be inspired by her.
Absolutely.
In terms of your question, though, of course, I was ecstatic. There were a lot of other things that happened before this rally. We did a very good job of articulating the risks to the field, gathering signatures, getting people to send letters, comment letters to the U.S. Department of Education to describe how these rules would impact them. So the volume of letters that went in, as well as the unique nature of some of the letters, was really important, because in rulemaking, most people don't know what rulemaking is, which is probably a good thing. So the fact that we got so many people who are normally not thinking about this to take action around the rule was very significant. But what was transformational with the rally is that the ultimate recipients of all these activities are individuals who are waiting for their chance to send their kids to a good school. So having moms come to DC and articulate what was at stake in plain language made a huge difference, both in the course of public opinion, but it also gave someone like me, who started her career advocating on behalf of individual families who wanted a school of choice, it kind of brought all that full circle together. I loved it, and I think the ultimate ticket to victory for us as a movement is by engaging those families far more than we have before in state advocacy, in local advocacy, and of course federal advocacy. But of course there are a lot of other victories. We have had so many of them over time, and so what happens sometimes in any anything that's disrupting the status quo is that you are going to hit the wall. And the reason the status quo is reacting the way it's reacting is because you have had an impact. You have been effective. If you didn't have that impact, they wouldn't be reacting this way. So the pain points and the challenges we're facing is a direct byproduct of our success. And you just need to make sure we're constantly reminding ourselves and our constituents and our funders that in order to take this ball to the finish line, now that you're at the 20-yard line with a team that has a really strong defense, you've brought the ball that far, it's going to be harder to, get that touchdown. But that's when the game is really taking place. This is not the time to fold and call it quits. This is the time to really fight because we're close to winning.
Absolutely. And for all the women listening or watching who want to stand up for what they believe in, whether it's gender equality, educational rights, safety, or just for a space to be heard, what guidance would you give them, including women who are considering a career in education or those who aspire to leadership roles?
I would first start by saying something that is said a lot lately, which is to really be true to yourself and, who you are and what you want to become. Because when I was growing up, my goal was, and again, most immigrant families want their kids to be lawyers, doctors, and engineers. So, of course, I took a different path. But nowadays, the jobs of tomorrow are going to likely be jobs that women are going to create today, because everything is being disrupted by technology. So I think it's really important to have good, strong core values and an interest and really know yourself enough to know what is going to make me happy. Once you home in on that, then figuring out what you need, what skills you need, and what education you need is going to matter. The other thing that I've leveraged, and quite frankly, the thing that's given me advantages that I don't know that I would have had in any other city, is networking. There are a lot of women and men here in DC who love to talk about what they do. There are a lot of jobs in public policy. So for me, identifying what I wanted to do, where I wanted to work, and then just talking to the people in those jobs to see how I could get those jobs is what made a difference, instead of just waiting to see an announcement or applying online, which seems to be the way people are searching for jobs. And certainly the pandemic didn't help. So I would, identifying who you are and what you want to do is the first step, but then I would place a little bit more of a premium on internships and on-the-job training. I have so many countless friends who have told me the story of they got a law degree, they went into a law firm, they hated it, now they're doing, they're a staff assistant or a chief of staff on the Hill. Now, I'm not saying the law degree is not useful to being a chief of staff, but I don't know that they needed to spend that much time and spend that much money for a law degree to do what they're doing today. So I think it's important to identify those things and to find individuals who are doing the work to really understand what brought them to where they are and use them as role models.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. Nina Rees, President and CEO of the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. I'm Brittany Baker, your host on Get Schooled on Public Education. Thank you for tuning in, and happy Women's History Month.
Produced by Heartcast Media.